My name's Janice McWilliams, and I am a longtime member here at Central. And today we're talking about something that's very near and dear to my heart, and is something that I think can really transform our community, and that is anger. Woo! Now, I am in different realms of my life. I see that this becomes an important thing for me to know about for myself, but also to know about as far as understanding how it relates in our relationships. So one realm is my family and friendships. And I have 2 teenage kids who do instigate a bit of anger in me, and I have a darling husband who, of course, never does. And I work with InterVarsity Christian Fellowship in campus ministry, and in that sphere of my life, I do a lot of training about how do you actually live out biblical principles, and so this comes up. And I'm a psychotherapist, and a lot of people come and see me for working on their issues related to anger. And so in all these places, I see that anger comes up a lot. And research study after research study shows that anger causes the most health problems of all the emotions if you have a problem with it, and it causes the most destruction in relationships when it is a problem. And so understanding and dissecting how anger works in us can be pretty interesting and important. Now, I was running an errand. I didn't really have time to run one day when I was on my way to pick up my daughter at school. And I went to Staples, and I had many little things I needed to get. And I was going fast through there and trying to make sure I wasn't going to be all that late, even though I was squishing this errand in. And I got to the checkout line, and the cashier starts scanning all my things and putting them in bags, and there are a lot of little things I got. So it took a while, and I was getting a tiny bit irritated, as it took a little bit longer than my ideal for him to do this. Well, then he finished, and I was relieved, and he turned back to the register, and he said, I hadn't even signed in. That didn't even do anything. It starts having to unbag everything and rescan it again. This is the point where I think I started to mentally fillet him in my mind. Now, after he redid all of that, he turned back to the register, and there's, of course, a problem with the register that requires the manager, who is not available. And I wait, a few minutes waiting for the manager, who I am also mentally filleting in my mind now. Now, does anybody relate to this kind of anger? I don't know that the cashier saw any, big thing from me, but inside, I was fuming. I'm going to call those types of people the stewers, okay? We stewers are the ones who, we have all kinds of anger going on inside, but you may not know it on the outside. What about the exploders, though? Are there a few exploders in the house? The people who erupt in anger. And unfortunately, often that's really harmful in relationships. But there are erupters among us. And how about the anger deniers? These are the people who actually presumably never get angry. They just get frustrated or maybe irritated or resentful, but there's no anger here, really. I like to say, if you haven't asked somebody's forgiveness in the last month, you are in denial. You are probably an anger denier. So you're somebody who won't allow themselves to believe that there's anger when all these things like frustration, irritation, and resentment are really just synonyms for, anger. It isn't as if Jesus' text here that I'll read in a moment goes, if it's just frustration you're feeling, never mind. So we have to know our style. Are we exploders? Are we stewers? Or are we deniers? Let's look at the text that we have today. We're in the middle of a series on the Sermon on the Mount, and Jesus is really walking us through these wonderful passages to let us know things he thinks are very important and critical for us to be able to handle as his followers. Okay, so in chapter 5, starting in 21, you have heard it said to the people long ago, you shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to his brother or sister, Raka, is answerable to the Sanhedrin. And anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell. Therefore, If you are offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First, go and be reconciled to that person, and then come and offer your gift. Settle matters quickly with your adversary who's taking you to court. Do it while you're still together on the way, or your adversary may hand you over to the judge, and the judge may hand you over to the officer, and you may be thrown into prison. Truly, I tell you, you will not get out until you have paid the last penny. So this text starts with Jesus saying, I think we can agree that murder is wrong. This is in the Old Testament, and I'm assuming that you all know it when he's talking to the people that he's talking to at the time. But then he takes this radical next step, and he says, but I also tell you something that's important about your hearts. If you are angry with a brother or sister, this is also a problem. And so he takes it the next level to the internal world, to the place where we often hold our anger. So he suggests then a couple of things that are remedies in his mind. One is to reconcile quickly, and another is to take the initiative to do it. Now, there are many texts in the Bible that deal with various aspects of anger, because anger is so important. It's addressed many times in many ways. I'd like to say one caveat about this particular text. I don't think that this text, with the immediacy and the going and initiating reconciliation, applies to every kind of anger. Some of you have long-term hurts, abuses, and betrayals that may take a longer process of healing before you would get to the place of this kind of, the things that we're going to talk about today as far as forgiveness and reconciliation. But in the overall picture of the Bible, we can find places to look at to help us with those places as well. So I just wanted to offer that because I know some of you sitting here have suffered horrible abuses and betrayals. And for you, I want you to know that there may be a longer process of healing involved, and that reconciliation may look kind of differently than it looks in this text. But as we do look at this, we see that Jesus is bringing examples of when we say, "Raka, are you fool?" Like when we come out with our anger, right? We might be having all kinds of things coming out, but then we say it. And he's also talking about court-worthy situations that may be very serious. So you're a business person and you've mishandled something. There are all kinds of things that could be addressed in what he's talking about. So let's start with some anger realities. And I think that this will be a good foundation for us as we springboard into how to follow Jesus into this text. One is that anger is not always bad. God is slow to anger and abounding in love. He's not absent of anger. God himself gets angry at injustices, at idolatry, at unfaithfulness. And so we have to understand that there's a place for anger. Jesus, in his life and ministry on earth, he expressed anger. When the Gentile court, where Gentiles could worship, was filled with moneymakers like a flea market, he was angry. And he turned over tables. When he healed on the Sabbath and was challenged about that by rulers and elders, he was angry and responded in anger. It says it in scriptures. And so we have to understand that anger is not always bad. Which leads to another point, that your brain was designed by God with the capacity for anger and anxiety and sorrow and joy. And there's an appropriate and good function to each of those things. So you didn't make your mind, you didn't make your brain, God did. And then we work with what God has given us. Thirdly, and this relates to anger in a very tender way, is you don't choose your background. Many of us grow up in family situations where anger was considered a first-line response to almost anything. Or perhaps you were in such a hard or difficult situation in your life that you were in a defensive posture and you really learned anger as a primary response to things. If that's the case, as an adult, it's very likely that anger is going to be a more difficult emotion for you to figure out handling. Just like people with anxiety disorders often have backgrounds or brain chemistry situations that make anxiety more difficult for them to handle. So you don't choose your background. You don't choose these things. But when you're aware of them, and as a follower of Jesus, you are responsible then to learn how to walk in healing around those areas. Next, there is much about our thoughts and reactions that we cannot control. Thoughts that pop into our head, angry responses to things, feelings that come up, these are largely out of our control, and they can't be helped. But this leads to the next thing, is that there is much about our thought life that we can control with practice, work, and faithful attending. And so when we have a flash of anger about something, we may not be able to help that. But then when we go and start mentally filleting, that's what we can control. It's all that stuff that comes afterwards. It's the fantasizing about someone's demise. It's the going over and over the injustices of what they've done to us. It's cataloging how much better and how much I never would have done that. All of these thoughts are the things that we so often let ourselves get away with. All of this falls under the category of rumination and ruminating. This is something that comes up in my treatment world so much because it is so devastating and harmful to people. Rumination is basically thinking thoughts over and over again, and it can include the fantasies, the mental filleting, the cataloging wrongs. And when it comes to anger, I'd like to say that the subset of rumination we're really looking at is called brooding. Any brooders out there? I don't know if I should make you raise your hand. This is something that we let ourselves get away with because no one challenges it. And no one in our society and no one in our churches. It's when we are in anger. It's when we continue the anger. You know, there's this interesting study that I cite a lot, that it takes about 45 to 90 seconds to experience a human emotion. So you feel that feeling, and then you kind of come back to your baseline after a minute or a minute and a half. Now, if you continue feeling that feeling, you're probably doing something cognitively to make it continue. Isn't that fascinating? You're remembering, you're rehearsing, you're going over it. You know, this is something that has become very clear to me in one situation. I live in a row house, so my neighbor is very near to me, and I have had numerous conflicts with my immediate neighbor about the hours of the 24-hour day that he allows his dogs to bark. And we've had angry interactions and gone back and forth about this a number of times. And I've initiated reconciliation with him a number of times because I felt like my anger has not valued him as a person. And I will be fine with that. But then I'll go to book club, okay? And they'll say, oh, the neighborhood book club, right? They're like, how are you living? You know, how's that going with your neighbor? And I might start recounting the next thing. Okay, what happens? My heart rate goes up. I'm getting angry all over again because I'm remembering it. I'm coming back to it. I'm rehearsing it. So this is brooding. And this is something that prolongs this situation of anger for us. So it's beyond the flash of anger. It's where we go with it. You know, the consequences of this are really, really stark. You know, we extend the life of the feeling, but it also impacts our mood negatively. Rumination, and brooding would fit in that category, is one of the biggest factors in depression and depressive relapse. So when we do this, we harm ourselves. It also makes our hearts sick. It constricts our hearts. Our hearts close down when we're brooding. And it also harms our relationship. Our relationships are really wounded by this. And we can't come to that person that we've been spending hours and hours brooding about with neutrality and, love. Often we're so angry by that point and we have judged them so harshly and gone so far with it that they're subhuman in our minds. If we dissect this kind of anger in our own hearts, we can see that sometimes there's something we're defending that really makes us feel good about ourselves. So when I went to Staples that day, and I was squashing in that errand that didn't really fit, and I knew I was going to be late to pick up my daughter, my supermom ego was at stake. Because I happened to have given birth to a girl who is one of the most time-conscious human beings on the face of this planet. 30 seconds late, is disastrously late. Now, I was going to be a good 10, 15 minutes. Then she was going to have her own angry reaction about my being late. And there's no defense, well, of course there was, the people I had filleted in my mind, right? No, it was actually my choice to cram in something that didn't really fit. And so my anger in that moment was really much more about my ego party as supermom than anything else. I really wanted her to see me, my daughter to see me as competent and with it and on time. So what's your ego party that you may be going for? See, laying down brooding is so radically countercultural in our society, but in our church too, because we think of it as our right and our sure comfort that we can go into our minds and think of ourselves as more right than other people. But when we go against it, it winds up being not only freeing to us, but such a testimony to the world. My neighbors, when they saw that I actually had a friendship with my troublesome neighbor, were amazed. Why did you ask his forgiveness? Like, why are you actually having a relationship? And I would say, I believe that God's heart is reflected in this. And this is the way it's better for me to live. I don't do well living this near to someone that I'm not reconciled with. But what it takes is knowing that, noticing it, and doing something about it. You see, when we explode and we say, "Raka," or "fool," we sometimes it's very clear to us that we've acted out in anger. But this brooding thing is invisible, and we don't think of it as applying to what Jesus is saying here, and do not be angry. But it does. It does apply. So what we then need to do is to realize that anger is affecting us a lot, that we're making mistakes and that we're offending other people and they're being hurt by us over and over again. And so Jesus gives us some ideas about what to do about this. He says, deal with it fast. He even gives this example of the altar, giving your sacrifice. And that would be a really important thing to be doing in that society in the time when he was explaining this to his audience. That's a really valued and important thing. But he says, even if you're there and you realize someone has something against you, run. First, go be reconciled with them before you even do this important thing. So he's basically saying, do it quickly. He also seems to be saying, you take the initiative. You do it. You go and take the first step. If you know someone has something against you, or you have done something against someone else. So I realize in all the spheres of my life that I described that I have, that we have let ourselves not do this for so long that a lot of times we don't even know how. How do we have a conversation like this? How do we do it? And so I want to just walk through it. How do you go about having these conversations? So, if you want to come to someone and let them know that they have hurt you, here are a couple of things to avoid. One is accusing. You made me feel blank. What this does is it sets up the other person to respond pretty defensively. It sets up a difficult dynamic. If you have the feelings, keep the responsibility with yourself and avoid kind of accusing them. Another thing is avoid generalizing. You always blank. You always raise your voice. You always prefer other people to me. Get specific. Keep your conversation about the one thing that you're hurt about. So here's a possibility for how you can approach someone. When you blank, I felt blank because blank. You guys, this is gold. You will never fail. Well, the person may not respond well, but this is a great way to approach people, okay? You can be A double plus and people might not respond well. That's not your responsibility, right? Yours is to bring the information well. But think about it. When you talked about me behind my back, I felt so hurt and betrayed because I thought we were having a private conversation. When you criticized me in our team meeting, I felt so embarrassed and hurt because I've really been trying to improve my performance. So this helps you take responsibility for your feelings, but offer the truth that the hurt has come. Now, at this point, you can stop and see how they respond. And again, they may respond well, they may not. But then depending on how that goes, you can also add, would you please in the future blank? Would you please blank in the future? So would you please keep our conversations private in the future? Would you please talk to me more respectfully in the meetings in the future? Now, if someone comes to you in your anger, you might be in that section of the pause and wait to see how the other person responds. So if someone comes to you with that, now what do you do? What do you do? 3 good, solid responses I'd like to offer. One is that you can say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry means basically you feel bad that somebody else feels bad. So if I'm away for a weekend with my college roommate and my husband tells me, I was really sad you didn't text me all day long when you were having fun with her. And then I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. I just got carried away. I feel bad. I didn't sin against him, but I feel bad. So I'm sorry as a response. It makes sense as a response to that hurt. Now, most of us don't know about anything beyond saying I'm sorry. Many of us have never actually had an experience of taking responsibility for sinning against someone. But if that's the case, the next possibility is to say, will you forgive me? So, will you forgive me implies like, I know I sinned against you. This is what it is. I need your forgiveness. In my work within a varsity over the years, I've done many, many, many letters of reference for people for many, many experiences. One time a student asked me to do a letter, and I completely forgot about it. She came to me because she had not gotten the position, and they had said her application wasn't complete. And she came to me, and the incomplete part was my letter. And she was so hurt and so devastated. I felt terrible. This was an example, and I'm sure we all have them. Like, I really messed up. We do really mess up. We sin against each other, and then this is the appropriate response. Will you please forgive me? Is there anything I can do to make it up? Now, a third response that I want to suggest that could be helpful is to say, let me sit with this and think about my part in it and get back to you. Sometimes you do need to think about it some. Sometimes those defensive responses come up and you're very tempted to just defend, or you feel so anxious about the fact that someone's upset with you that you need a little time to think through, well, what is my responsibility in this? I'm actually not sure I see this. And then you go pray. Talk to a trusted friend, perhaps. Be really honest about what your part in it might be. And then come back, and then make sure you come back to them. But that's also a valid response to this. So, trying not to defend yourself in these moments is really, really hard. Because what you want to do is to make that go away, right? Make that hurt not make any sense, because you're fine. So a lot of us have that automatic response to defend ourselves. There are these marriage researchers called the Gottmans, and they analyze couples' interactions for 10 minutes, and then they predict with 90% accuracy whether the marriage will fail or succeed. And this is what it's research voodoo, right? But the 4 things that they look for are really interesting to me. The 4 things they look for are defensiveness, criticism, contempt, and stonewalling, meaning freezing someone out, basically. Now, if you defend yourself if you're defensive in your marriage relationships, the Gottmans say that is very bad. But beyond that, in our friendships, in our work relationships, there's probably a 90% chance those relationships will fail as well if these elements are present. So when you feel yourself wanting to defend, no, okay, let me take some time and think about this. Another thing is that we want to put it back on them sometimes. Oh, you're so sensitive. You're always like this. You need to toughen up. So when you feel yourself trying to do that, back off. Take some time. Be able to step into your responsibility in the interaction. It might make sense to identify points of misunderstanding. But again, just watch for defensiveness when you're doing it, because that might make the conversation go much worse. So in the end, here's the really wonderful thing, is when someone asks you to forgive them, there's this great response, and it's, yes, I forgive you. And too often, when people are so uncomfortable with this whole idea of we've hurt each other and we're trying to reconcile and it's so uncomfortable, what they do instead of saying, yes, I forgive you, is they try to minimize it. Oh, it's no big deal. I didn't really care. It's no big, everyone does that. Have you ever done that? When the actual response is, I forgive you, and we are now reconciled. So step into it. Give the person that joy and experience it yourself, the freedom and the release. And if you find yourself needing some time to consider it before you're able to say that, that's perfectly valid as well. What I'm suggesting is so utterly countercultural and potentially revolutionary. I, for many years, was in UC Davis's campus fellowship. We had this wonderful, vibrant fellowship where I was on staff with InterVarsity. And we really tried to take this teaching seriously, and we would very regularly talk about how to go about reconciliation. And a rather uncomfortable thing happened. I had a lot more people coming to me telling me they were upset with me. And I had to really learn about having these conversations I've been talking to you about very personally. I had to learn a lot about not being so defensive, because that was my instinct. And those conversations were hard, but they were healing. And I have to say that there were many ways that community had health and vibrancy, because we were living in reality. I didn't like having those conversations except once they were over. But what it was helping me see is I actually was stepping on a lot of people's toes and hurting people. I had reality to learn about myself. So living in that reality was what helped me grow. If all those people just smiled at me when they saw me and never told me what was wrong, not only would our relationship have been harmed, but I wouldn't have had the opportunity to take the next step in my own growth. Now, when a community lives like that, and that kind of reconciliation, people notice. It affected the campus that we lived like that. Our community here, people will notice if we live in this kind of reality. And it will affect our neighborhoods. It will affect our hurting city. If we live in reality, we live with the reality that we hurt people and we are hurt. But Jesus tells us how to get through that, to the real relationships that we want to have. Now listen, these instructions or the ideas that I had up here, some of you may be thinking, I would never be able to do that. I would just explode in anger. I couldn't do it. If that's you, if you really deal with that explosive anger and you know that these conversations would be impossible, work on it. Don't be content with this part of your life staying like it is. Take it into your relationship with Jesus. Get prayer ministry. Join a support group or even get therapy. The same thing for you guys who feel like, she's talking about not brooding. That's kind of like breathing for me. For some of you, you may not be able to conceptualize your life without the habit of brooding. Same thing. Bring it squarely into your relationship with Jesus. Have people pray for you. Get accountability around it. Get help. Don't be content with it staying the way it is. At the end of the day, we have to relinquish our ego party to forgive. You know, the young woman whose letter I didn't write? To forgive me, she had to lay down her right to be angry with me, to fillet me in her mind. See, forgiveness is actually a type of suffering. This is why I get kind of impatient with the phrase, let it go, you know, in the song. It just implies, like, it's just this easy thing to do. And I think that what Jesus shows us in having to teach us so much and so deeply about forgiveness and anger is that it's actually not easy to let it go. And Jesus is our model in the suffering of forgiveness and reconciliation. It cost God something to forgive us. It cost him Jesus. And so, of course, it cost us something to forgive. And all that pain and all that sin has been taken care of because God was so gracious to make a way for us to be forgiven. You know, and when Jesus went to the cross, he didn't delineate all the reasons he had to go. Your impatience, you know, your brooding. No, he went. He didn't remind us of how he hadn't done anything, and so therefore this was a very altruistic thing. And yet that's what we are tempted to do when we're forgiving. And so let Jesus be our model as the one who so graciously forgave us. Let that be our teacher in how to move forward in this. Because there is so much to be gained. Instead of constricted hearts, we have hearts that are open and free and growing. We become more human as we walk in Jesus' path in this way because we become more like him. We're more at peace and we're more able to love freely and have healed and reconciled relationships. Today we'll be taking communion. And this, in a way, is an act of worship for us, much like Jesus suggests or acknowledges in the passage where, you know, it might be a time for us to really think, I might need to talk to someone right now. I might need to talk to someone right after the service. Let our celebration of communion be a reminder for us, let's go be reconciled right away, quickly, because this table represents for us the cost of forgiveness that was paid for us. So do it quickly and take initiative and let your hearts start to become more and more free. And this will change our community, and it will change our neighborhoods, it will change our families, and it will change our city. Let's pray. Father, for all of us who feel kind of a prick of conviction and a sense of knowing that there's someone somewhere we need to talk to, I pray that you would keep those people on our hearts and minds, and that you would give us right now a spirit of courage and obedience to walk in it, and with pounding hearts and all kinds of nervousness that we would be able to walk into the conversations that we need to have in order that we may be more like you. In Jesus' name, amen.